There you go.
Welcome, everybody. World Academy cafes. I'd love to know in the chat box how many of you, if this is your first cafe, say in the last year, just say I'm a relative. You know, I've missed you. And if it's your first time here, just put in the chat box first timer. For those that have been around for a while, you know that we're going to welcome you, give you a rough idea of what we're talking about. And today it's the broad topic of organizational design, and specifically for executives. And where this comes from is Beatrice and I have spent a lot of time over the last, I don't know, 10, 15 years teaching public programs on organization design, where you get people who want to be org designers, I guess, in some form or another, coming on the program. But typically where org design efforts fail is as you'll see, you know, a little bit later in the talk, the role of the executive in the design. So I started to wonder, what if, you know, you have a program called Finance for Non-Financial Managers. I'm sure many of you have come across it, and lots and lots of non-financial managers have gone through Finance for Non-Financial Managers in some form or another. What if there was org design for non-org designers, except that the dirty secret is that the only constant organizational designers are the executives. They're doing it all the time. So that's what we want to talk about today. Everything today is an outline of a program for your comment and review and consideration. And then it hopefully also gives you a chance to meet other people in this industry or in line management or whoever shows up on the call. So to get you started on that process, we want to send you off for about 12 minutes into small groups. Liesl will be setting up the groups now. Obviously introduce yourself if you happen to find yourself in a room that you haven't spoken to anyone before, and then answer this question. Do you have a story of a line manager doing organizational design or redesign? What happened? How did it go? That's just to bring your head into the space. I hope that there are a couple of good stories, and then you meet a few people. Got about 12 minutes. Liesl, are you ready to send everyone off?
Almost ready.
Almost ready.
Almost ready.
Well,
need a minute.
You
there
can
we go.
take that 60 seconds to write down the question. And we'll see you back in about 10 or 12 minutes. I was lucky enough to get into one of the breakout rooms with some great people. I hope you were all as lucky as me. Okay, so hopefully your head's in the space now, and you've got some questions about org design and when does it work and when doesn't it work. I want to share some cautionary tales that maybe you alluded to in your breakout sessions, and so I'm going to put you back onto the PowerPoint. Where am I? Screen 2. Can you see the screen, Liesl?
Yep.
Okay, so firstly, I guess you'll recognize some of these names. And I know they all made headlines in one way or another. And I want to use them to illustrate what I mean by design failure. Because when you hear things like poor corporate governance, you might not think of that as an organization design issue. A lack of effective leadership, is that an organizational design issue? Obviously, inefficient organizational structure, you'll see that coming up in quite a few of these explanations. People often equate organization design with structure. And yes, structure is a piece of it, but it's not the whole story. Design is a bigger idea than the boxes that make up the organogram. Bureaucratic inefficiency, is that a design failure? frequent CEO changes and a lack of consistent leadership in Transnet, with 9 CEOs since 1994. The lack of a stable and coherent organizational structure led to a decline in operating performance and financial health. So these are all, in my opinion, design failures. And of course, they're the big ones that made news headlines. I think they're the tip of the iceberg, because as hopefully you've figured out in your breakout sessions, organizational design is happening all the time. It's continuous. It's not always an intentional project. It's just happening. Lawrence, in our breakaway group, talked about the dangers of executives building their own kingdoms, constantly building their own kingdoms, and not integrate. There's no integrating logic, or there seemed to be an absence of an integrating logic in some of his experience. So you'd have to ask yourself, organizations have been around for a very, very long time. Why don't we have a standard approach to, or at least some kind of good practice that executives understand and use in organization design and redesign efforts? Now, as you can see in this entire presentation, I'm making a big shout out or acknowledgement to Naomi Stanford, who's my mentor or guru, or whatever you want to call her. She doesn't like any of those labels in org design, and she has a great book. It's called Designing Organizations, and the latest edition is 2023. So do yourself a favor and get a copy. Naomi talks about why don't organizations have a standard approach, and she starts out with just no foundational understanding of organizational design. So it's a kickoff point that many of the executives don't understand the processes or models of org design, or the systems thinking around org design, and so they see it as a kind of a black box. They might as well just do anything if they don't know what good practice looks like. Then, of course, myopia. So in the absence of a systems view, there's a preference just to address the symptom or the thing that's in front of me, the presenting problem. And when our executives are under pressure to perform, they are likely to do whatever it takes to solve the problem that they have in their division or in their team or in their customer base, and not necessarily try and think through how that aligns or integrates with the rest of the organization. Bizarrely, there's still a strategy structure logic break, where people just don't make the connection between strategic design as kind of a sporadic thing, execution of that strategy into the structures and into the design of the organization is an ongoing project. And that connection breaks. So the strategy at some point just becomes a document in a drawer, and the ongoing decisions that design and redesign the organization just drift off in a different direction. Then there's this irresponsibility thing, which this is a touchy one. Delegating to consultants to deliver the design rather than work with the consultant to create a design. That relationship is such a tricky one. Lawrence, in our breakaway, was talking about the immense challenges he'd had with corporate executives who were either totally dismissive of the design professional, and I've seen that. So they say, look, I'll tell you how things happen around here. And then the design professionals trying to integrate some kind of systems view, but is discounted. And that leads to the mess. But on the other hand, we've seen organizations that just ring up the design professional and say, do the design, work with a couple of people, come back and tell us what it is. So there's no ownership of that design. Ignorance, just not understanding that it's an ongoing process, and then inertia. So if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And Beatrice has astounded me with the number of acronyms she's managed to discover to describe the world we're in. You know, VUCA, Barney. You know, I think she's got an acronym list now that is trying to basically say things seem to be changing a whole lot faster than they used to. If your attitude towards organizational design is inertia, it's working well enough right now, then not building the capability to even do the smallest adaptations well compounds over time, and eventually you miss your inflection point, you miss your S-curve, and you're in trouble. And we see those organizations hit the headlines all the time, and we also experience them in our clients who just wake up one day and suddenly the good days are gone. You know, the tide seems to have gone out. So what we end up with, I think, is a lot of individuals making it up. And I had to think about that a lot. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? A lot of executives making up their own approach to solving problems of design. And we see that play out as silo mentality, or, you know, I'll fix my stuff and don't worry about everybody else. And I'm definitely not advocating for dogma or doctrine, because I think there's something evolutionary about having multiple experiments running at the same time. So I'm not prescribing a dogmatic approach to design, but I do believe that there needs to be some kind of pattern, some kind of shared framework or approach that at least produces a coherent picture and not a gray, sludgy mess, as you see in the diagram. The idea would not be to have, you know, my favorite color is red and Sindiswa's favorite color is yellow and Beatrice's favorite color is green, and we're all putting our hands on the canvas and just turning it into sludge. So what then, you know, what do we need to think about what would we want organizational executives to think about? And the first thing is a process. I think, again, you know, I love the anecdote Lawrence was talking about in our breakaway group, and he was in a design project, and it was turning into a mess, and he and a couple of other engineers, and I think it's really important to underline they were engineers, stopped and said, just explain to me your process. I hope you don't mind, Lawrence. I took those words down. Explain your process to me. And from there, they started following the work. And through that, they were able to untangle this, this mess that was playing out. Mohammed, also in our group, was in a very large corporation and talking about how they tried to create this integration by having divisional project offices and then rolling those up into a program office who was supposed to keep oversight over all these divisional projects. And I got the sense that from him that didn't really work. So I think attempts to control through command and control or through bureaucracy, particularly as the organization gets larger, don't work. I think it's easier to control through ideas than it is to control through bureaucracy, especially as you're dealing with something that is a sense and respond to everyday issues. Every day, managers have to solve a problem that often involves a redesign. If you're going to call all of those, you need to register a project. That's got to roll up to a program office. They've got to roll down some kind of, you know, it's just somehow you've got to distribute an approach. So what you see here is a relatively standard combination of two things. Firstly, how is it that we might want to redesign? And the green boxes, I think, are what goes on all the time. There's signal detection. And I think a lot of our colleagues work and people try and work intentionally in getting better at signal detection and then pattern recognition out of the signals. Particularly the complexity guys are doing a lot of work in there. And how do you sense? But I think most often every day, managers receive very strong signals, like some kind of slap in the face. Their boss tells them this thing isn't working, fix it. Or a customer says this thing isn't working, fix it. These are day-to-day strong signals. So assuming that the signal is detected, at some point, there's some sense making, and then there's some sort of target for redesign. You might say the sales team needs something, or some process needs tweaking, or some staff need to be replaced. And that targeted, whether you do it intentionally or not, there's some kind of assessment, some kind of redesign effort, a plan to transition. Sometimes you have to consult with HR, sometimes it's bigger. Then there's a transition, and there's optimization. Depending on how serious you're being about that, there's either consultative or autocratic approaches in that first stage in the assessment, and that will infect and shape the process. In the design space, you're either very intentionally using some kind of model or framework, maybe running it through one of your favorites, Galbraith, Litwin, Nadler, ENA, our ENA. Maybe in the transition, you've consciously decided waterfall, agile, geometric, and maybe in the transition management, as Mohammed was talking about, there is a PMO of some form, there is some kind of formal change management program or not. But I don't think that the problem is there. At least in the encounters with clients I've had over the last couple of years, there is an awareness in executives of a need for some kind of change management. There's an awareness of a need for some kind of project or process to be followed. I think the problem is in the blue, where there's a relationship between understanding your current design, being able to articulate what our current design is, to see the whole system, and then to be able to target what you're trying to shift, and then to redesign inside that framework. And I know that the metaphors are too simple, but if the metaphor was a house, and there's a problem in the kitchen, those two words make sense. The house is visible. You can walk into it. You can take photographs of it. You can see it. And kitchen makes sense. And you can look at the kitchen and you can discuss what you want to change. When it comes to an organization, what I find is there's no way of talking about what is house and what is kitchen, and what is plumbing and what is, or there's no shared way. So executive under pressure to change performance in some area or to react to some signal just does what's on the top of his or her mind often. And I think, if the conversation could start with some kind of shared map, even if it was, pick your favorite language, your operating model. Okay, let's make that visible. Because whether we talk about the design as a overall design, or we talk about it as an operating model, at least there is some way to get shared understanding of what is going on. So, World's View's leading design program. This is where we're heading. This is what we want you guys to tell us what you think about. The first step would be to articulate the current design. Now, I know there's that issue of time. We're too busy to prepare for things. So the idea for this whole program would be, let's take real cases. So try and take whatever it is on your plate. If the logic is design and redesign is going on all the time, then there are always real cases to play with. We don't have to invent one. We don't have to create case studies. We need to bring a cohort of leaders together from an organization in an attempt to start a kind of a design council. So try and draw as many people as we can. They should be executives, line managers, not the professionals who've gone off to learn about org design, the line managers who are going to have to do it every day. And then work with them to articulate the current design first. And that muscle we try and build over time. So what is that operating model? How do we articulate it? How do we refine our understanding of it? And I'll come back to what we could use as a basis there. That should give you a systems view of the organization. So some kind of useful framework with descriptions and some consensus about the way things work around here in that executive group. And I think the systems view piece of it is quite important. Then we start to look for, okay, what's the issue that's driving you to design now? And that could be an internal issue or an external issue. Look, in the rare case where they don't have an issue at hand, we would facilitate a conversation around, okay, how's governance? How's psychological contracts? How's workforce demographics? You know, that typically is some of the internal stuff that is there all the time, and there's a reason to start some sort of work. Externally, of course, new technology, I think that's driving conversations everywhere. New business models, market change, sustainability, that can open up a piece of design work that group can then start to work on. There are plenty of others. I mean, there are, you know, optimizing a sales team, streamlining a marketing function, restructuring an IT department. We really don't have to try and invent cases. They're there. So then to develop a few useful measures, you know, that metric and measures part of the conversation. So just take a moment, take a beat, try and link those measures to the design, not just to the problem. So they should be measures of the design with indicators that relate to the problem, and then redesign. So now in that redesign effort, yes, learn by doing. So I think one of the people in our group said there's just no way to think about organization design as an academic subject. You need to design. So learn by doing, guide a journey, have a design person with you, have resources and a toolkit. So we make that available, and it should be group work and it should be in company. You should not be working and learning. You know, this design effort is so tied in with your strategy and your leadership issues, and you know, if it's full design. So that's what a program would look like. And what I believe is that program can be adopted and repeated then as a design effort. Leading design, you could have ABSA's leading design program, something like that. So that's, at least from our perspective, you still need to support that. So we've got, if your strategy is terrible, then the conceptual structure of your operating model and your org design would be weak, and you need a program. We've got the World's View Strategy Safari for that. If your leadership team is dysfunctional, or your operating teams are dysfunctional, we've got purposeful teams. Alana Murray's got team coaching. I mean, there's offerings and support for team development in that space. And then if your leadership is just dysfunctional, we've got 9 conversations in leadership and other programs. Those would support this, but this is design effort. How do I design an organization that's coherent and makes sense and doesn't look like gray sludge? And not we, as a leadership group. So in there, articulate the current design and redesign. What I want to share with you now is just, okay, a little bit of how. Otherwise, we're just talking about, grand ideas. We work with the establishment and adaptation landscape. This is the relationship between structure and agency. So our belief is that the way things are in the organization, the structure, and the way things are supported or changed, the agency, are the essence of the model that you need to understand how your organization functions. So whatever operating model framework you're using, or whatever organization design framework you're using, you should clearly be able to see structure and agency in them. And if you're going to do it for executives, you're going to have to do it in a way that is reasonably simple. Not because executives are stupid, far from it, but because they're very busy. So they need a good enough framework that allows them to go deep, but can also hold, the concept. So on the structural side, the establishment of the organization, the landscape, what is, then you've got to articulate and re-articulate and re-articulate in ways that make sense. And I'm absolutely certain you're all going to be nodding. Clarity of purpose, direction, clarity of goals, clarity of metrics, clarity of values. On the processes side, where Lawrence particularly and Mohammed were talking in the breakout, what capabilities, what are you trying to do? What is the work? Follow the work, describe the work, then the processes that you use to develop that work, and then the structures that flow from those processes, and how are you measuring that? And in that understanding, so much insight emerges. Then you think about the technology and the systems that are being used in and supporting that work. And again, a lot of insight coming out of what's our technology design, what's our process design, what's our direction design, what roles, patterns, what roles and jobs then arise. So what are the kind of jobs because of the technology used, because of the capabilities and processes, and then what ultimately is the information flow? How is it flowing? Through what meetings, through what systems do we understand what's going on, and how are we managing performance? Each of those is a pattern. And for those of you who've read Alexander's pattern language, each of those individually is a design pattern, and together they should make a coherent design. But that's not enough, because that's just structural. On the agentic side of the design of the organization, how is this organization designed? You've got, firstly, in what forum and who does the sensing that we're talking about here? How do you decide who's getting information? That is a trigger for whether the organization adapts in an autocratic or a collaborative or a adaptive way. Who determines possibilities? Who decides what options any thing could take? This relationship, for example, between design professional and line manager, or the relationship between technical expert and political power manager. What forum? Who makes the decisions on what the possibilities are? Who dreams? Who imagines? How is that space and that moment designed intentionally in the organization? Who makes choices? In what forum? In what process? Who gets to conduct experiments? Who develops prototypes? Who drives change? Who amplifies and dampens change? And who integrates? Now, if you've been working in this space long enough, you know that the spectrum of how you could design the organization in that agentic space, how much agency do you give people and how do you do it? It's not just, you don't decide, I want to give them more or less. There's mechanisms that you use to amplify or dampen that agency. Each element, each of them, from sensing to examining possibilities, to making choices, to developing, to integrating. Each of those is designed and should be designed in a way that is coherent and a whole. So we have said that a shared model or framework is helpful, and this is what we'd be driving. A way to think about the design, a way to think about the operating model, a way to generate a sense of what is happening in our organization and why. So with that in mind, this as our overview of the Leading Design program, and this is a zoom in to the core of the map that we work with executives over time to try and develop a way that they can say, okay, we've got a sense of what's working, let's now redesign. And if we're going to redesign, which piece or which element are we redesigning and why? Opportunities to collaborate. Then if your clients on the call, or at least what we're looking for in the market is any organization, 60-ish to 1,000 people. I think below 60, we know that org design happens from the chief executive, usually. Everybody just follows, and that's fine. It's a kind of a spider in a spider web design, usually. But anything above 60 up to 1,000, we reckon, we're keen on pilot projects inside your firm. Try it, see if it works. See if you can get a small group of executives starting to think in a different way, and then if it scales, it scales. Colleagues, obviously marketing shares. So, I mean, if we post stuff, if you like what we're saying, amplify it. Customer share, if you've got clients that you think might want to try this, give us a shout and we'll obviously share the proceeds of that. If you've got org design experience, we are interested in co-design and co-deliver. So, as we evolve this program, I'm sorry if I take this for granted, but that 20 years ago, the programs of 9 Conversations in Leadership Purposeful Teams, we've tried very hard to prototype programs, codify them, and then scale them out. And this is where we're heading with org design for executives or leading design. So if you're keen to join in, let us know. But before you do that, you're going back into small groups. And what you get a chance to talk about is a bit of gossip. Is this a useful approach? So I'm not asking if it's like earth-shattering, because it's not attempting to be earth-shattering. It should be, if you're a practitioner, it should be fairly obvious. But is it useful? Is it good and useful? What would need to happen for the market to try this? And you could have a customer point of view on that, or you could have a practitioner point of view on that. And Liesl, how are we doing for time? What do you reckon? Is this a 12 to 15-minute conversation?
Yeah, we're good for time. 15 minutes?
15 minutes, and then we're going to debrief that when you come back. So I'm really curious now to hear what are you thinking, what comes out of that small group. So enjoy your time in the small groups, and we'll see you when you get back.
It was awesome.
Really?
Well,
That rich thinking in our group, yes.
so Beatrice is part of room 1, so why don't you kick us off?
No, we had an agreement that Sindiswa would kick us off and we would join in. Go, Sindiswa.
What's the question I'm responding to?
Well, the question you're responding to, thank you, Cindy, for clarifying, is, what did you notice in that conversation? So it's not so much about debriefing what everybody said, but more about what did you notice in that conversation? What overall, what are you hearing, and what are people in that room kind of feeling about this conversation? And then we'll see where that takes us.
I think the overall sense was of hope, because in our conversation, it sounded like the current reality, particularly in corporate, can feel grim. Doing more with less, time pressure, and it doesn't feel like there's space to stop, think, reflect, and to really engage in some of the elements of the framework that Craig shared before the breakout. So there was definitely a sense of hope and optimism and a longing for a framework like this that could offer shared language that can help leaders view outside their silo or their specific area of responsibility and provide as kind of a unifying framework for an organization to appreciate decisions made, to make sense of symptoms experienced, signals being noticed, and recognize the interdependence of within an overall system. Did I miss anything, ladies? I think that was kind of our main sense in our conversation. Is this needed? Yes. Do we know where to start, where to find that first brave soul? Not yet.
If I could just chime in to support what you've been saying around the brave soul, Sindiswa, because that resonated with the rest of the group when you said, Sindiswa, I think it needs a brave soul. and then we create a success story. But how do you approach the brave soul? So there are a number of ways you could try to get the market to try this. It could be direct approach. It could be working with a couple of brave souls. Or one thought that I was having was that maybe there's an opportunity for some kind of a large group process. But how do you structure the invitation? And who do you structure it with or to? So that was just some thinking there. Something else that struck me, which I shared with the group, was from structure to agency. And everything in your agency diagram really speaks to the element of legitimizing agency in an organization. But how do you legitimize agency? And the extent to which you have to legitimize agency could lead to a necessity to re-explore, re-examine your current culture, your current leadership philosophies. That's a design element in itself. Then it starts to become complex. And that just left me with a lot of questions as opposed to answers. But yeah, we had a fascinating conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm so desperate to comment on that, Beatrice, but I think what you and Sindiswa just said is powerful enough on its own. I want to leave it, see what the next group, where the next group takes us.
All right, so room 2 had Cecil, Kenilwe, Mbali, Sam, and Tumelo.
And I got voluntold by Mbali, and she waited for 3 seconds before the end so that I didn't have time to object. So our discussions we spent a lot of time about the fundamental of being and the risks of being reactive. And we spent quite a bit of time in our discussion around local authority, municipal structures and in government in general, where actually processes are very prescribed and there are periodic reviews. And so there is a structure and there is a process providing for accountability in order to mitigate reactive approaches. And then we also just looked at the diagram of the issues prompting and design process. And we just noted there that pattern detection was really important, pattern recognition, and spending time thinking there. And like the 4 occasions along the route of go, no go. In other words, it's not just a matter of the starter firing the gun and the race goes to the end, but there is thoughtful, systemic consideration of a few key questions along the way in order to prevent it just from jumping in and doing.
Thanks, Cecil. It's good leadership from Alana Murray that you guys get volunteered. I'm curious to see whether the rest of the group agreed, or if there are points that they also want to highlight.
I think Cecil summed it up perfectly. So we were all just in consensus that what you're offering, Craig, the framework that you're offering is much needed to mitigate sort of like the reactionary approach that most organizations take. It provides an opportunity to be more proactive and put some thinking into our design. So Cecil summed it up for us.
I see Sam's got his hand up. Do you want to come in, Sam? I'm assuming his. I can't see you, Sam. Sorry, may not be his.
Okay, I guess it's mine. Okay, I think maybe due to time constraints, we might not have had the time to really discuss our framework. But if I look at the proposed worldview framework in terms of the process, it really ties up very well with what the city is using and what has been prescribed in the staff regulations. So we also have a 6-phased approach to our structural design, starting with the diagnosis phase, which is already catered for in your methodology, and the second phase, which is the capability determination phase. And that's where we have quite involved, involvement, because that's where we look at our current functions, current processes and all that. And that's where the re-engineering happens, which will then translate into a service delivery model that the city will then take forward to the design or the redesign phase. And after that, yes, we then plan for transition. So in our case, once the structure has been done, we will then, what do you call this, submit the structures through the various approval, and each stakeholder will need to be briefed before they give us a go. So each phase, there has to be a briefing that happens to the critical stakeholder that approve. And once we are given a go ahead, then we move to the next phase. And to go like that until it reaches the ultimate stakeholder that approves, which is council. And once that is done, then we move to the last phase. In your case, you said it's optimizing or optimize, but in our case, we'll then monitor and see if the design does address the problems that were identified in the diagnosis phase, and so forth. So the process will then, where there are gaps that have been picked up in the design, will then go back, to the process to see where have we missed. Is it a structural issue? Is it maybe implementation issue? Maybe there's no buy-in in terms of the implementation of the structure, then which will need different interventions, maybe not the structural intervention. So that's how we see your process fit into our process. Thank you.
Sam, thank you. I think where those organization design offices exist, there is a blessing in the sense that there is some kind of framework, and often that is in well-run local authorities. The benefits, of course, are a reliable, repeatable process. Where I've heard them criticized is 3 points. One being they focus very much on the structural elements. So in that model that we shared, you've got structure and agency, and where you've got a really strong overall design process run by a central process office, often the design of agency. So can people in local authorities show up with full agency, or are they heavily constrained by the structure? And if heavily constrained, secondly, then speed. So can you change quickly enough to respond to what is happening? I would imagine that, I remember driving from Pretoria out towards Rudaport, I think it is, and just seeing how fast the suburban sprawl has grown, and imagining the difficulties of planning infrastructure, sewage, water, roads, refuse, because you wake up one day and suddenly it's all changed. When you have such a highly structured process, does agency suffer? Can you respond quickly enough? And when you've got a really strong team such as yours, Sam, does the executive, does the line manager, does the responsible municipal manager take ownership, or do they just abdicate and hand off? So I wonder how that structure and agency relationship works in those environments. And maybe we can loop back to that, but maybe before we do that, we should check in with the last group. And is it the last group?
There's 2 groups left. So
Yeah, let's see what they have to say.
Room 3, Rivonia, June, Skulk, and Robetse.
Hey, hi. I'm happy to start, and group 3, please feel free to fill in. In terms of the framework, what we discussed is that it's a great framework and a document to have, especially when leadership don't necessarily want you to follow a process and they just want to do things their way. So you have like a framework and a document that, research has shown, studies has shown that this is proven and works well. So you can leverage off that. But what we also said is you don't necessarily have to apply it in the sense in which it's displayed in the framework. You can use it flexibly to speak to the areas of your business that's going through that and adapt where applicable. But it gives you as the HR person, especially if you don't have an OD team, the support that ordinarily an OD person would have brought in. So we liked that piece. And in terms of, seeing the value in leadership and, leadership having exposure to this, what I feel has worked, which we didn't necessarily speak about in our group, but we endorse the fact that leadership should be on this and they should also know, because it's a joint process. But what I feel has worked is kind of getting someone from the senior leadership team to be the sponsor or the champion or the advocate of this. And then maybe even having a pilot group that goes on to this, sees the benefit and the value of the framework before you just kind of spread it throughout the whole organization and ask everybody to adopt it. So if you've got your pilot group, you've got proof points from that pilot group to be able to share with the rest of the organization. Group 3, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add that I might have missed.
If I can just add something, I think, Craig, it's fantastic, but what is also important is the implementation of the organizational design. So the OD process must support it afterwards to make sure that the new design becomes a reality. That's a lot of times where it falls flat.
Yeah, I mean, Sam was saying that in some of these process models, the last step is, to evaluate at closeout. And what Naomi Stanford has shifted that to is optimize. And it's an attempt to try and recognize the ongoing work. And again, if you've got an external consultant, they would close and leave. But if you're lucky enough to be inside, or you're the executive, that optimize phase it's ongoing. I mean, it's fluid. I like the way Rivonia talked about, use the framework to give you a shared sense of the terrain. Use the framework to give you a shared language for understanding the system. But it's not dogma. It's fluid. If you've got, I suspect, Rivonia, you're part of VML, is that right?
No, I'm part of Ogilvy, but
You're part of Ogilvy, same space. Yeah, you guys are, I mean, these big fluid organizations, projects coming in and out all the time, clients shifting all the time. So you can't have a rigid design, but you can have a shared model and a shared language between leadership and line. And then that optimize phase is really a proxy for and rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. But what I'm fighting against is currently the way we do that is every project is unique. Every project seems to have a unique philosophy, other than the highly regulated projects that Sam was talking about. They're well governed, well structured. But I'd love to know from Sam, if there's time when we've got the last group's comment, is how do you transfer the thinking into your line, into that, that municipal manager, or to what extent do they take ownership of that process? Let's maybe jump to the last group so we hear them fully, and then we can maybe generalize.
Last group is Lawrence, Ludray, and Mohammed.
The group I ditched. I joined them for the first time and left them alone for the second.
Decided not to go interfere with your opinion.
Yeah, exactly.
we're actually griping and what mourning the loss of you in our group. So no, I'll pick up where you've left off now. The last comment you've made, Craig, and that is my understanding is, often consultants come in and they go. They leave. And actually before they leave, they actually leave enough crumbs open for them to start with a new project in the same place. Sadly, what I've learned in my later years is that we most of us did the coaching models, the grow model, somewhere along the line. They've extended lately, I don't know how many years ago, to call it the growth model. They added a T and a H, and that's basically towards the end you create tactics and habits, and that's actually perpetuating whatever you brought about, is to make sure that it's ingrained. It becomes a way of, and I think that's what we often miss in consultancy and in OD work. And going off in a bit of a rabbit hole here, but if you think about large, let's do some bad things, or talk about some bad things like invading Gaza, or taking another country in a war in Ukraine. What is the after story? After you've done that, succeeded or failed, what is the after story? And same with organizations. You do this huge organizational change. The structure is there. As you said, we agree with that. The structure is there. The agency is there. The people are willing. But where's the political will? Where's the agent or the sponsor to say, listen, but we're going to see this through till the end. And the end is not demolishing the building. The end is afterwards there need to be something else put in place. And what do you do then? So yes, I think there's two, but the question is the political will, the center point that drives this. Is it the executive? Is it the board? Is it an individual? Is it a team leader, project management office, whoever that might be? The framework is taught, well, basic framework, I think, to the best of my knowledge, is taught in business school, in universities, etc. Although it's always difficult to teach those already seasoned, skilled people, something they know a lot. What we've found is that success stories is what's important. Typically what you said in the rural areas, you see the expansion. And in some funny, wonderful way, there's always the agencies there. If you really go into those expanding shanty towns, etc., there's a third, fourth, fifth, I don't know what tier, the economy going there, it's thriving. Yes, there's crime might be rife, and poverty is in unprecedented levels, etc. But there's something going on there. So the agency is there. The structure is always the informal structure of how they're doing it. It evolves. But the question is there the municipal structures or to empower that? That's a problem. And I think many times the success stories is what we're missing. One point, maybe last thing, is that I shared is that my own experience, two good examples, two good experiences, one bad and one very good, was that the consultant, they tap all your information, they put it in nice slideshows, and then ultimately, kind of bluff me and help me to present, and which I think went pretty well. And then afterwards he said, no, but he wants to get the stage for the presentation, and then he presented. But I mean, with all the bells and whistles, everything with his backup systems that he's got, back office that can prepare it, and everybody was hoo and hawing about his presentation. But he said word for word what I said. He was just, he stole my presentation. On the other hand, very good example was a consultant that I used in my early days. Came in, tapped all my information, and he said, no, what are you going to prepare? What are you going to present? And I presented. And at the end, at the meeting itself, he said he's going to talk on the following 4 or 5 points. And I thought, well, that's my points. He said, no, and handing over the loans. He's going to present. And I presented, and they all looked at him and said, no. I said, listen to him. He's an expert. He knows his business. He knows the process. He said, I can't find one thing wrong with it. I'll smooth some edges. I'll put some color and paint here and there. And that became a good story in all directions, for me, for the consultant, for the business. And And I think that's what we need, is good stories. And there's obviously to market that and publish it in newspapers and scientific journals and wherever it's necessary. Yeah. And I think, yeah, it's oftentimes also maybe the last thing that I can remember is oftentimes it's people are resistant, the agency side are resistant to change or to OD designs, etc., because they have to, and there's not really a need for that. And then you find that the agency also flaws and it falls flat. Okay, any Ludray or Mohammed?
Ludray, look, I'm looking at it from a more medium size, where there isn't any processes in place. I was thinking more of, one looks at this whole new concept of incubations or the incubators, to get the processes or to get businesses to buy into, what we've got to offer. As well as you're looking at, for example, your professional bodies. I'm just looking at, from an accounting perspective as well. As I've mentioned, that if you look at, the one slide that you've mentioned where, where those big, massive companies have failed, and you find 2 or 3 of them is because of accounting and because of internal controls being missing. And I think that would be, and as well as your other than the professional bodies, you've got, like the commerce, chambers of commerce, where you've got medium to larger companies that are sitting on these chambers. And, for you to get just to get in there and to do a presentation, just to educate, I think, initially educate, and then from there, most probably, the whole process, sell the whole process as such.
Yeah, thanks, Mohammed. I think, the scale of the problem and the scale of the solution is, big. It's a chronic problem and it's going on all the time. What World View is proposing here is I want to try to package the simplest possible solution. If any of you looked through the balanced scorecard stuff that came out, I think it was Kaplan and Norton, and eventually read all 5 books that were massive, thick books on the execution of balanced scorecard, that is not going to be able to scale across lots and lots and lots and lots of line managers. You need a lighter, simpler idea, I think, that might marry the design professional with the line manager. Unless Liesl objects, I'd like to invite Sam just to close us out on behalf of the delegates. And maybe, Sam, you've had a chance to think about some of those questions I was asking in terms of, yes, you're the design professional, but how do we get this? How do we get a better response from the line, and how do we improve speed, and how do we improve agency? Sam, if you're still with us, would you mind closing us out?
Okay, thanks. I think if I look at your framework, in our case, org design doesn't become a straightforward process. It becomes an art because, you have to deal with a lot of stakeholders. You have politicians that have a mandate from the community, which must be translated into org design. So the agency part, that is where our executive leadership will play most of the time to translate what the community needs into a delivery model of the city, which will then translate to your structures, and they will also now be involved in terms of monitoring the implementation of the structure, the redesign, in line with the framework that is prescribed. And at each phase, they'll then give the approval. But where leadership is mostly concentrated on, are we addressing the needs of the community? I think the main challenge in the municipal space, it's now the implementation and perhaps maybe the redesign process might take a bit longer, because the city consists of different industries, if I were to put it that way. You have water, you have electricity department, you have social development department, you have health. So it's not an easy process to just run through that whole restructuring, you know. So that is why most of the time that the 5-year redesign, or the redesign that happens after 5 years, it's usually outsourced to consultant to run with it. And what happens after consultants have put the design in place, where OD will also be part, as internal OD consultant will be part of the process, we then deal with the maintenance issues. So that's how we manage it from the city side. But agency, that's where leadership, you know, your council, your mayors, your city managers, that's where they're mostly focused on, because they are not technocrats to know how functions are, you know, configured and all that. They will rely on experts to do that part. But all they want to see, is this design talking to our IDP? Is it talking to the community needs? That's where their focus is. Thanks.
Sam, thanks for giving us a real insight into the meat and the grind of the work that's going on in local government. And good luck to you. To everybody else on the call, the overrun is entirely my fault. It's a poorly designed session. It should have finished on time. But it's an interesting enough topic that we've kept most of you on. So please stay connected to us and to our community. Our next cafe is in a month, as usual, and that'll be team intelligence. We're diving into team intelligence within Bali. If you want to be sure to get an invitation, follow us on LinkedIn or subscribe to our newsletter. It should be reasonably easy to do, one of the two. Huge thanks to everybody who contributed and participated. And final reminder, if you want to play further, reach out as a colleague or as a potential client, and let's see how we make this work. Thank you, everybody.